Bayesian rules in Bayesian disaster important update. My name is Stefano Barone and I am professor of statistics at the University of Palermo, Italy. In the last presentation at the beginning of this year, I summarized the work done on the Bayesian case and I drew my conclusions from the case, promising myself not to return to it, as for me the case was closed, having demonstrated what I wanted. Unfortunately, however, I have to give an important update, and this update concerns an aspect that I have already covered in my previous presentations on the analysis of the Bayesian case. So I make a brief recap of the previous episodes. And my first analysis, presented shortly after the shipwreck in when I presented it was October 2024, I set up the discourse of bias rules, in particular bias theorem, applied to the Bayesian case. Subsequently, after some time, after following the case, I felt the need to do an in-depth analysis of the weather conditions between 18th and 19th of August 2024. Then I did experimental work on the effects caused by the wind on a ship of that type, anchored at the bow. And in the last presentation, I made the physical consideration on the capsizing of the ship, hypothesis of reversal due to sabotage, and then returning to bias theory, I concluded that the probability of sabotage was equal to 1, and therefore I had personally concluded the case. On the last slide, I have included a link to a video posted on YouTube that reports the compendium of all this previous work. Today, I have to refer to the presentation made in October 2025 relating to the analysis of the wind data. In summary, I had shown that the wind speed detected by weather stations not far from Porticello supported the hypothesis of a possible gust that occurred in that period of time in which the shipwreck of the Bayesian occurred, and that is this gust, based on my estimate, had not exceeded 40 knots. I had also stated that my analysis was based on data found from weather stations located on the Sicilian territory, of which, however, I had not mentioned because in the site from which I had obtained the data, it was precisely requested that any publication be explicitly authorized in advance. After that, I had also specified that in this weather station that I had analyzed, there were no data coming either from Porticello or from the nearby Bagheria, only 2 kilometers away, and therefore it was not possible to have a very accurate data, but it was still possible to make a good estimate by interpolation. Also considering the private weather station near Solanto, and also making orographic consideration. In addition to this, I had considered the effects of the wind on the territory, which therefore led me to conclude what I said before, that is, the speed of the gusty wind that night, in that time slot, had not exceeded 40 knots. Then I had also taken into consideration the sea factor, which was absolutely not rough, but very calm, as can be seen from many videos that were recorded in Porticello, both during the previous evening and the next morning, but also from what was witnessed by Captain Kastenborner, who was there with his schooner, that is the one who then recovered the castaways and brought them to safety. In my opinion, however, the lack of wind data from weather station near the shipwreck site remain a problem. For other reasons related to my research activity, I found myself talking to colleagues who deal with environmental issues related to the territory, soils, agronomic, and forestry aspects. And talking to them, the availability of data from official and certified weather station emerged whose data can also be used in court. Among these networks of weather stations are those of the Sicilian region and the civil protection. Then there were also two circumstances that have occurred in the Sicilian territory lately, namely the cyclone Harry, which hit the Sicilian territory in January this year, and a storm wind of strong intensity that occurred in the Palermo area last February. These events and these talks I had with colleagues inevitably led me to reason and go to re-examine the wind issue. Here are the brief summaries of the two analyses made. As for Cyclone Harry, it must be said that it brought adverse weather phenomena, especially very rough seas and rain in those days. As can be seen from the graph, the wind, however, did not exceed the 45 knots in Palermo and 25 knots in Termini Imerese. Instead, with regard to the storm that hit the Palermo area particularly in February, we can say that the effects of the wind were particularly dramatic. There have been trees uprooted by the wind and extensive damage to structures and infrastructures. But looking at the wind data in Bagheria, we can say that it did not exceed 26 knots. This represents a further corroboration of what were my consideration on the case of the tragic night of August 19, 2024. However, here is the important news that has stimulated this further communication. The Bagheria weather station exists. It is an official station of the civil protection and also measure wind speed data. So I went to examine this data to better understand, and there is no need to make a great lucubration because now I will show you what has emerged. Here you can see this graph shows the wind speed recorded by the weather station over the entire period of time from the moment the station was activated. The station is still active. What do we see? We see that the data have been collected continuously, except in a time interval. The time interval in which data is missing is precisely the month of August 2024. This is unfortunately a very strange fact. Colleagues who are experts in civil protection data have confirmed to me that the situation is highly anomalous. I wanted to check if for other weather stations of the civil protection of the Sicily region, which record wind data, there were data gaps, as in the case of Bagheria. Fortunately, there are none. So this striking situation emerges, which I felt the duty to communicate publicly. Because clearly this is a very important fact on which everyone will then be able to make their own considerations. I also want to add, as a statistician, that if by chance the data were to reappear in that time interval, I personally would have difficulty considering them reliable. Thanks for your attention.